There's this conception or this stereotype that, the younger generation is lazy or they don't like to work. But I think it really depends on how they are being developed throughout that time in order to get, where they're going. A lot of them are on social media, and so they want that instant gratification. It's always that instant gratification. But I think once we take a step back to say, this is actually how it works. Like, I had to get it out the mud. Maybe you may not have to get it out the mud as much as I did, but it's not going to come as easy, right? And so everybody wants to set up that tripod and do those TikTok dances or review these products and think they're about to make $1 million overnight. And for me, I teach my students that, you're going to have to work for it, but here is how you get there. Welcome to Onyx Rising's conversation series, Dialogues with the Doctor, where leadership meets inclusion one conversation at a time. As always, we are here to educate, engage, and inspire professionals to create inclusive, forward-thinking environments. I'm your host, Dr. B, and welcome to today's conversation.
Hello and welcome to Dialogues with the Doctor. And today the tables are turned. I get to interview Dr. B.
Hello. I'm so excited.
I
am
not over here yet. I know. And this is perfect topic for us to have this conversation because we are going to discuss generational differences and hopefully get to this place of generational synergy, right? People want to outline the problems all the time, but what do we do about them? So as a researcher, right, I know a lot of people, we haven't really talked about your background, so maybe we should actually start there.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and then I'll jump into generational diversity, particularly what trends are you seeing in this space, both from a research perspective and also personally.
Okay.
So who you are and what you do, Dr. B.
Well, thanks for, having the tables turned today. Again, I'm Dr. B, Dr. Brandy. I have my PhD in Education Policy, Organization, and Leadership, long title. So I normally just say Education Policy, but I also have a concentration in social and cultural issues. Most of my background is in education, so I'm on the administrative side, but then I also teach undergrads and graduate students. I've sat in several leadership positions, been assistant dean of students as well, and so I've seen and worked with generations in different spaces, and so I'm very excited to have this conversation.
Excellent. So within the space of, I guess I'll say since you've been really as an administrator in academia, what would you say are some of the trends that you've either seen, witnessed, or even researched for that matter in this space?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do as an administrator, I work with first-year students, and so one of the things that I do is run a summer bridge program, so working on that transition from high school to college, and particularly with the generation that I work with, Gen Z. They are very interesting, to say the least, right? So you know how growing up is like, back in my day or my generation, I'm like, yeah, okay, it sounds good. But now that I'm experiencing another generation and I'm leading them, I'm just like, okay, I get what my parents were saying, or I get what the aunties are saying and things of that nature. But definitely they have their own way of doing things. And I think that for us who are in a different generation that are leaders, that are working with them, we haven't necessarily seen it done this way before. And that's because of, my husband calls them tablet babies. They don't know how to do anything but get on the tablet technology. Anything technology related they can do, right? And I'm like, no, give them a little more grace. They actually know how to do these things. But I feel that, I think you were having a conversation earlier, that we have to also teach them these things that we know, that we expect them to know, but they don't know. One of the things that I would say is communication. So their communication styles are very different. They don't necessarily know how to talk to other people face to face. And so a lot of what my program does on campus is work on the academic development, that professional development, and then that social/emotional learning development. Gen Z has a big case for mental health and well-being, and so they want to know that any space that they enter, it's a safe space for them to be able to articulate that or what's going on with them, or being able to have that grace for them to step away to deal with those. I don't like to call them issues, but to deal with whatever they have going on at that time. Another thing I would say is the development of them professionally, like how they are moving about in the workplace. There's this conception or this stereotype that, the younger generation is lazy or they don't like to work. But I think it really depends on how they are being developed throughout that time in order to get, where they're going. A lot of them are on social media, and so they want that instant gratification. It's always that instant gratification. But I think once we take a step back to say, this is actually how it works. Like, I had to get it out the mud. Maybe you may not have to get it out the mud as much as I did, but it's not going to come as easy, right? And so everybody wants to set up that tripod and do those TikTok dances or review these products and think they're about to make $1 million overnight. And for me, I teach my students that you're going to have to work for it, but here is how you get there. It doesn't necessarily have to be, and I always tell my students, like, you are going to learn so much outside of the classroom in terms of how you show up in these spaces, what skills you're learning. I try to tell my students that organizations or companies are looking for not necessarily those specific degrees unless it's like nursing or engineering or something like that, but they're looking for skills. They want to know that you know how to work in a team. They want to know that you know how to problem solve. They want to know that you have leadership skills and things of that nature. So those are the things that I try to build within my students in my program, and that's a lot what I'm seeing with this generation.
Yeah, so you already are speaking in a space where possibly our audience would be familiar with all the generations. So let's just, for context and level setting, just recap, because there are 4 generations in the workplace. And the funny part about this is when I was in college, they used to say, Workforce 2020 is coming. And I don't think people really realize, nor did organizations prepare to be there. And now they're seeing a mass exodus of baby boomers. Or some are hanging on and they didn't want them to, right? And they haven't yet developed the next generation. Now, people in my generation, Generation X are the executives, right? So talk first, set the stage and say, just let us know how many generations are in the workforce typically right now.
So typically right now we have, I would say, 4 generations in the workplace. Baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and then Gen Z. And so for me, I'm in an interesting spot right now. So I lead a team. I am a millennial. I have a Gen Z that reports to me, and I have a Gen X that reports to me. And it's a very different dynamic. It's very interesting, to say the least. So we can get into that a little later, but those are the 4 that we do have in the workplace.
Well, and you have the reverse. So what I hear from our clients is, help me get along with or help me understand this younger generation, and you have the flip. So that could be very interesting. So what are the differences and similarities as you break those groups down? And start whichever one is standing out for you, even if it's the flip-flop, right? So talk about that.
For me, I would say, you said differences.
The differences. What are the big differences that you see?
I would think the work-life balance is one of the biggest differences between generations.
So what do you mean by that? So is that like their expectations about
expectations of work-life balance, and then just how to navigate that in general, right? So I feel that Generation X, because that generation may be a little more old school, if you will, like, okay, we're going to go to the 9 to 5, we're going to pick the kids up from school, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And then Gen Z or millennials, on the other hand, expect or maybe want that flexibility in the work-life balance. Maybe can I do remote one day so I can be at home with my child, or whatever the case may be. And so not necessarily... it's not about knowing how to balance the two, but it's like the expectations of, and then, of course, the organizations or the supervisor could be from a totally different generation, not necessarily understanding the needs that this person may have because they're in a different generation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier development, right? So I've seen, and with working with organizations, that the amount of feedback that someone from a younger generation might want may be more frequent than, the way Gen X, right? Wanting a formal mentor might be, and that may be needed and wanted on both sides, but I think even organizations need to look at informal ways or reverse mentoring, et cetera. So I'm curious, when you think about all these different expectations, because we can go a lot longer on expectations, right? Expectations of time, expectations of development, expectations of
quality of work,
how you're treated if you work on a team, if you work independently, remote days, hybrid. So, I mean, there's a longer list, right? How would you say this is impacting how organizations should attract, develop, and retain talent?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that...
is impacting.
Is impacting. I was going to say, I don't think organizations have necessarily prepared for this type of talent.
Yes.
And so one of the ways that they should be preparing for this talent, one of the ways could be making sure that if they are interviewing or retaining or trying to retain this young talent, that they understand their needs from the very beginning. A lot of times when folks start jobs, they're like, all right, here's your job description. That's what you're supposed to do. Figure it out, have fun. But it's this generation that is coming into the workforce needs a little more hand-holding. And then you just brought up a really good point of the mentorship. And that was one of the points that I was going to bring up a little later in the conversation. But somehow, some way, organizations pairing Gen Z with a Gen X or a millennial for a mentor, whether it's inside like their same division that they may be working in or someone outside. But I think that it goes far beyond what, especially if these students or if these employees are getting a degree, it goes far beyond what the college setting can do because they're already coming to us very underprepared. And so I feel like we need to continually uplift and build and develop this talent no matter what sector they're in continuously.
So let me ask you this, because I think we need to have a deeper dive with this topic in general. But when you think about generational differences on a team, considering that you also are dealing with a lot of the reverse of most people, what would you say or what advice would you give to leaders that are trying to understand the different generational differences and how they can manage that among their own teams?
Yeah. One of the things I would say, one of my great mentors, love her to death, Grace. Let's start there. We are all people, right? Like, we gonna make mistakes. We are gonna mess up. They don't know what they don't know, right? And so for a new person or someone in a different generation to be able to come into this organization or this company and try to move it forward, but then the leader comes in to say, oh, well, you didn't do this right, or whatever the case. Like, let's take a step back. Let's give them some grace. Let's maybe give them the proper training or say, you may not be used to it, but this is how it's been done. If you're able to, come put your own spin on it or whatever the case may be. I think also adapting, learning and growing. So for me, one of the things when I started very early on trying to be in this space, it was, we've already done that. It didn't work in the past. And I was like, all righty, great. So I thought that was, how all leaders or supervisors were, because that was literally my first impression once I got into this space. And it was because that person was there in that particular organization for over 30 years. And so it was kind of like, well, this is my house. This is how it's going to go. But I think for leaders being able to adapt, being able to give that grace to say, like, it's okay, provide learning opportunities. A lot of times I feel that some folks may not necessarily go seek those out, but if it was up to the organization or that leader to say, these are the professional development opportunities that we have for this position, knowing that younger generations are coming in and may not be developed. So how are you starting that off early on?
I love it. So, Dr. B, you've given us some great insight, right? Around one, just understand the different generations, right? Show people some grace. Look at mentorship as a way. And I think you're both saying, would you agree? I mean, are you saying the reverse mentorships or mentorships where both are learning from each other? And I think the other thing I was thinking about is, it's almost viewing generational diversity versus like this is different or bad, but where can we create synergies? Yeah, right. Absolutely. So, and that's a different spin or a different mindset on it. So, anything else that you would like to add around generational differences or generational synergies before we close? Because we are definitely going to have a part 2. Okay. Because I really want to talk about how do we really retain talent from all backgrounds? I think we spent more time on understanding and recruiting and their different expectations. But in part 2, I really want to dig into that. So any other final thoughts around building generational synergy?
Building it's here. Like we have to get on board.
We have
to figure it out. It is here, and they are looking to us to be able to move them forward, right? You just had this conversation about empowering others, and as a leader, how are you empowering the next generation that's coming in, because they're here and they're the ones that are, up next, if you will.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and until next time.